in preparing for the start of trading under the rules of the AFCFTA. The champion of the AFCFTA, His Excellency President Mahamadou Issoufou, provided a substantive and comprehensive report with recommendations in terms of how we take forward the work of the AFCFTA. On the 5th of December, I reported to the heads of states that we now have 35 state parties to the agreement. In other words, we now have 35 countries who have ratified the agreement out of 55 countries. On the morning of the 5th of December, the government, the Federal Republic of Nigeria, deposited its instrument of ratification, becoming the 34th country to do so. And you can see that there is momentum, that members of the African Union take this very, very seriously. This is the second fastest instrument to be ratified since the establishment of the African Union. And the first instrument, the fastest instrument to have been ratified was, of course, the AU Constitutive Act itself. Out of 55 countries, 54 have signed the agreement, which again underscores the political will of our heads of states and governments across the African continent to make sure that we advance our market integration objectives. On the 1st of July, 2021, we launched that was the official trading of the AFCFTA. And on that day, Africa truly ushered in a new dawn in terms of how quickly we move towards an integrated market on the continent. From the 1st of January, my apologies, from the 1st of January 2021, Africa started trading on preferences that were negotiated and agreed to over time, over a 5-year period. You will recall that we were scheduled to have started trading under the AFCFTA on the 1st of July 2020, that is to say last year. However, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we had to postpone the start of trading from July 2020 to the 1st of January 2021. In the last few months of last year, the ministers of trade, the senior trade officials and technical experts were working very hard to make sure that we actually have a commercially meaningful start of trading on the 1st of January 2021. And indeed, the heads of states received a progress report about all the work that was done to enable a commercially meaningful start of trading. So what do I mean by a commercially meaningful start of trading? Of the 34 countries who have deposited their instruments of ratification, there are those countries who are, as we speak, who are ready, such as Ghana, Egypt, South Africa, who are ready with the customs infrastructure that is required to make sure that trading is commercially meaningful. On the 4th, for example, on the 4th of January, Ghana had an event in terms of which they officially recognized the first consignment of goods to be exported under AFCFTA preferences. I understand that other countries, other state parties around the continent are preparing similar events to mark this very important milestone. Certificates of origin have been prepared, which is, again, part of the customs infrastructure, the customs tools that are needed to make sure that trade is commercially meaningful. We also agreed, which is what was recommended, which is what was reported to heads of states, we agreed at the level of ministers last year in November that countries that are not ready should establish a modality for giving credit to traders who have started trading from the 1st of January 2021, started exporting under AFCFTA rules, so that if country A says today, as things stand, I still have a little bit more work to do to set up my customs procedures for the AFCFTA. I will, however, recognize the exporter and recognize the fact that this exporter has to be credited for the reduced tariff or the reduced duty under which we are now trading as state parties to the agreement. So there will be countries, and there are countries, who have the requisite customs infrastructure in place today as we speak, who are trading under the AFCFTA. And there are countries who are in the process of establishing those customs procedures that are required. But traders will not be penalized. There will be a system where you will be credited for the trade that has taken place since the 1st of January 2021. And the credit may come in the form of a duty that is reduced. It is entirely up to the member states to decide how that credit will be, or the reimbursement will be provided. We are at the moment, along with member states, exploring the various mechanisms for how this credit should be provided where a country is not ready with the customs procedures on the 1st of January 2021. Some of the options that we have considered are the establishment of an escrow account from which later exporters can draw down for their reimbursement in recognition of the fact that we are now trading under new rules, which are preferential rules. This mechanism that we are talking about of reimbursing exporters is not new. It's not a new invention. Various trade agreements around the world where there is a time lag between the ratification and implementation of the agreement, it has been done before. So it is not something that the AFCFTA has, it's not a reinvention of the wheel. We are using models that have been used before in other parts of the world, in other trade agreements. The most important point that I would like to emphasize is that Africa is now trading under new rules, new preferences, because we want to build a single integrated market on the African continent. And I know that in some parts of the world, we get criticism. We are criticized, we are told that we are rushing things, that we're actually not quite ready. But I want to ask those who hold that view, tell me of a trade agreement where all countries are ready at the same time. I don't know it. I have never heard of a trade agreement where in that particular arrangement, every single country is ready on day one. Not to my knowledge, it doesn't exist. And so I regret that as Africans, we are held to a much, much higher standard for how trade agreements should operate in practice. We negotiated this agreement in record time. Yes, of course, we're still continuing with negotiations, but there are other arrangements that have taken much longer than us to negotiate and to enter into force. There are other agreements that have been going on, negotiations for decades, and we have been able to do this in less than 5 years. We're not doing it because we want to prove anything to anybody outside of the African continent. We are doing this because it is in Africa's interest to have an integrated market. And so to the extent that there is something that we have to demonstrate, and there is something that we have to prove, it is to 1.2 billion Africans that we shall and we are committed to an integrated market on the continent, and that the 1st of January 2021 was actually the start of that process. Market integration is not an event. It is a process. It takes time. It took the European Union almost 60 years to get to the depth of integration that the European Union has achieved today. And so similarly, Africa's market integration objectives will take time, but you've got to start somewhere. And on the 1st of January 2021, we as Africans started in earnest on that journey of market integration. Let me conclude by saying the following. We will introduce mechanisms for supporting trade under the AfCFTA. One of the mechanisms that we are working on with Afreximbank, and I'm very grateful for the support of Afreximbank. One of the mechanisms that we are working on is a Pan-African payments and settlement platform, which Afreximbank has agreed to provide the liquidity for the settlement and the payments, an initial amount of about $500 million that Afreximbank is providing, so that when a trader in Ghana trading under the AfCFTA has to transact under the AfCFTA with a counterparty in Kenya, that Ghanaian exporter will be able to transfer funds in local currency, in other words, Ghanaian cedi, to the counterparty in Kenya, who will receive the funds in Kenyan shillings. So we want to reduce the cost that is associated with converting local currency to the dollar in order to be able to transact under the AfCFTA. We all know the complications that arise from currency trading and the cost associated with convertibility of the need to convert our currencies in order to be able to trade amongst one another. We have 42 currencies on the African continent, and that in and of itself is a complicating factor when we want to ensure that we have a consolidated market on the African continent. But we believe, along with Afreximbank, that the Pan-African Payments and Settlement Platform will take us a step in the direction of resolving the challenges of multi-currency trading on the African continent, particularly in relation to the AfCFTA. Second, we are working with commercial banks on the African continent to raise a minimum of $1 billion for a trade finance facility, primarily for small, medium enterprises, so that the benefits of this agreement, the market access that this agreement creates, is not taken advantage of only by the big corporations on the African continent, but such that our small, medium enterprises, women in trade, young Africans in trade, can also have the opportunity to grow their businesses, to grow their export trading companies by having the support of this $1 billion trade finance facility in support of trading under the AfCFTA. And in due course, we will make a concrete announcement of the modalities for this trade finance facility. So we are very determined to make sure that the AfCFTA and trading under the AfCFTA, as I said earlier, is indeed commercially meaningful. We're also introducing digitally enabled platforms to make sure that there is interconnectivity on the African continent, interconnectivity for business expansion, for reaching new customers. And on the AfCFTA app, a trader will be able to access a new market in a different part of the African continent. So you will be able to access the market in West Africa from Malawi in Southern Africa and vice versa. And through digital enabled platforms, we believe that we can accelerate interconnectivity, particularly of small, medium enterprises across the African continent, so that we reach our goals of reducing barriers or trade and investment barriers in Africa, in accordance with the objectives of this agreement. Let me conclude by saying the following. a few months ago, the World Bank released a report that, amongst other findings, found that where we implement the AFCFTA effectively as the African continent, we have a potential opportunity to push back the frontiers of poverty and to lift 100 million Africans out of poverty, 70 million Africans out of moderate poverty, and 30 million Africans out of extreme poverty. And more importantly, that presents us with an opportunity to close the gender salary gap and to make sure that at the center of benefits that come from this agreement, women and young Africans are the immediate beneficiaries from implementation of this agreement. So by 2035, we can double intra-Africa trade. By 2035, we can lift 100 million Africans out of poverty. And all of that will have started on the 1st of January 2021. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be a daunting task. It's going to be very difficult, but we know from market integration initiatives of other parts of the world that it's not easy and that it's a very difficult task. Some countries, as I said earlier, some countries will actually be legally committed, politically committed, but in terms of the administrative infrastructure, the customs infrastructure that is required, they may need a little bit more time to start in earnest the trading. And so I wanted to take this opportunity to have a conversation with you, my fellow Africans, to assure you that we indeed have started trading under new rules on the 1st of January 2021. It may take some time before each of us see the direct benefits, but again, I emphasize that market integration does not happen overnight. It is a process that takes time, but at least we have had a very good start, and I'm very encouraged by all the messages of support from millions and millions of Africans across the length and breadth of our continent. Africans know that this is a task that we have to confront head on, that this is a challenge that we have to confront head on. We're not going to get another opportunity as the African continent to integrate our market. This is our last opportunity. And all the heads of states are fully in support. All the governments of Africa are fully in support. This is a challenge that we shall face collectively as an African continent. And so we are not going to be deterred by our critics. Certainly, I am not going to be discouraged by those who criticize us from other parts of the world, who say that we proclaim we've started trading, but they don't see evidence of that. Our commitment and our responsibility is to 1.2 billion Africans. Those are the people to whom we have to demonstrate seriousness. 1.2 billion Africans. Those are the people who have to see that in earnest, we are trading under this agreement. I am accountable to them, 1.2 billion Africans. I'm accountable to all the governments of the African continent. I am not going to be discouraged by those who seek always to criticize the initiatives that this continent undertakes. As long as I'm the Secretary General, I commit to you, 1.2 billion Africans, that we as a Secretariat shall do everything that we can to make sure that the positive projections of this agreement, the fact that we have an opportunity in 15 years' time to lift 100 million Africans out of poverty, I commit to you that that is our primary objective for the next 15 years. I thank you very much, Madam Tanka, and I will take questions at this point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Excellency. And for those who are just joining us now, we have just listened there to the Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Area, His Excellency Wamkele Mene. He was briefing us on the status of the AFCFTA. Now we will start by taking the questions, but please, I want to remind you, when you are sending your questions, make sure that you identify your press organs and your name. The first question that I have here on the Q&A box is from Raphael Oyi, who is working for the Auditor Diplomat, Extra Magazine, Abuja, Nigeria. His question is, what is expected of the media men across the continent to help smooth flow of the AFCFTA? Basically, as members of the fourth estate, what modalities should be adopted? That's the question number one. Maybe we'll go to another question.
Was that what is expected of the media?
Of the media.
Okay. Thank you.
Maybe you should first answer that question.
Well, I can take 3 questions and I answer them in a batch.
Okay. All right. I have the second question is from Jean-Pierre Alumba Lukamba. As you said it well, on the 1st January 2021, Africans started to trade. How they can trade effectively while AFCFTA didn't yet launch the free movement on the facilitation of movement under the new AFCFTA rules of African and the diaspora. The movement of people in our continent, that's the number 2 questions from the same person. The movement of people in our continent is still very challenging, especially in some African economic regions such as the SADC and the north of Africa. How far with the implementation of the Pan-African passport to the ordinary Africans and the diaspora?
Okay, we can take one more, Madam Tanko.
Okay, a very short one from Jean-Pierre Alumba Lukamba. How about the road infrastructures and flight routine?
Right. Thank you very much for those questions. The media is a very important stakeholder in our work, because we are able to communicate through the media to communicate with Africans the work that we are doing, and we are able to disseminate information about the work that we are doing through the media. And thus far, we have been working with the African Union, of course, who have arranged this session as an organ of the African Union. We have been working together from time to time to ensure that we have these press briefings so that we can disseminate information to the whole of the African continent. The Secretariat is available at all times at your disposal as the media for information briefings, to obtain information from us. In my capacity, I provide interviews to media outlets across the African continent to give an update of the work that we are doing. And so we are at the disposal of our partners in the media for the purpose of disseminating information. Now, in respect of movement of persons, the protocol on the movement of persons is not part of the AFCFTA. It is a standalone protocol. It is a standalone instrument which has not yet entered into force. So it is not yet legally binding as an instrument. I do, of course, take the point, the underlying point that Jean-Pierre is asking, and all I would say is that we can only do what the agreement enables us to do, what the AFCFTA, which is law, binding law, what it enables us to do. We are not able to move beyond what the agreement has provided. The agreement does not make provision for free movement of persons. The agreement, however, does make provision for the movement of business persons, and that negotiation of identifying the categories of the movement of business persons is the subject of negotiations in the context of trade in services. So we are enabling movement of business persons in the context of what the agreement provides for, of what the agreement allows. We don't have the legal authority to move beyond that. The ability or if we wanted to have free movement of persons, that is entirely up to the member states of the African Union. It is not the African Union as an institution. It is the member states themselves who can decide at what point they want to ratify the protocol on the movement of persons. I think it's very important to be very clear about this. It is not the AFCFTA Secretariat. It is not the African Union Commission. It is the member states of the African Union themselves who can actually decide the point at which we have full free movement of persons across the African continent. But as I've said, to the extent that the AFCFTA, the agreement establishing the AFCFTA, to the extent that it allows movement of business persons, we are facilitating that in accordance with the law itself. Similarly, on the issue of the Pan-African passport, it is not part of our work. We have a very narrow mandate, and that is trade. Our mandate comes from the agreement establishing the AFCFTA. Unfortunately, on some of these things, we are not in a position to do things beyond what the law enables us to do. We have to subject ourselves to the rule of law, and in this case, the law is the AFCFTA, and it does not permit us to move beyond and introduce measures for the movement of free movement of persons. That is for the member states, not for the AFCFTA Secretariat. Now, on infrastructure, absolutely it is correct that we have to have complementary policies and complementary measures, because you do need infrastructure, whether it is roads, whether it is ports. You do need infrastructure to facilitate trade and to enhance trade on the African continent. We, of course, will work together with African multilateral development finance institutions to leverage on the policy complementarity between the work that we do, the mandate that we have, and also from a development finance perspective, their mandates and the work that they do on infrastructure development. I think we have to be conscious of the fact that we do not have an unlimited mandate to do everything. The agreement is very clear about what it is that we as the Secretariat can do under the AFCFTA, and we have to stick within the mandate that we have. But it is obviously, it is trite that there are complementarities between trade and infrastructure development. And in order for us to double intra-Africa trade, by the year 2035 or sooner, if we can, infrastructure is a critical part of that. And that is why I say we will work together with the development finance institutions on the African continent. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. Our next question is coming from Gamu Shirai Mutezo. He did not identify his press organ, but he has two questions for us. And his first question is, how will we manage relations or extent to which we trade import material with countries such as China? I understand it will not be an overnight journey. Question 2, he says, please share with us, if available, the mechanics of starting to use the African passport visa requirements application processes. We'll go to our next question coming from Abdul Latif Balanta. His question is, can you envision a day as we can in the diaspora when import and certified diaspora companies may be afforded the same concessions, levy, and tariff waivers, although coming from the sixth region of Africa? If you may want to take a third question, Excellency, it's yes, coming from Daniel Vambunu. How can the United States of Africa and Global Pan-Africanism Network partner with the African Union in the realization of the expected benefits of the AfCFTA is intended to bring?
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for the questions. On the first question from Gamu, there are rules of origin which are currently being negotiated, and rules of origin serve a number of purposes. The first purpose rules of origin serve is they assist in the prevention of infiltration, if I can use that word, of third country goods into the AfCFTA market. They enable us to prevent transshipment of goods. We want this agreement to create jobs on the African continent. We do not want this agreement to create job losses. We want this agreement to create jobs. And we have negotiated and structured our rules of origin in such a way that there is a high threshold for value addition, that there is a high standard for value addition. In other words, you will not be able to import a shirt from a third country, put a button on it, and say made in the AfCFTA. We want to foster industrial development on the African continent. This is the second purpose of rules of origin that have a high threshold for value addition. We want to make sure that whether we are talking about raw materials, whether we are talking about commodities, whether we are talking about all products under a country's economy, we want to make sure that 20 to 30 years time, Africa has industrialized, and that leveraging on our rules of origin regime, that we actually create value addition on the African continent. I think if anything that we've learned from the COVID-19 pandemic, it is that we have an over-reliance on the import of all of these products that we require to fight the pandemic, germ-killing products, the personal protection equipment, the masks, and so on. I'm very happy that in the last few months, we have had countries on the African continent redesigning and repurposing their industrial development posture to make sure that we manufacture this equipment that is required to fight the pandemic, that we manufacture it on the African continent. And so rules of origin are very, very important to ensure that we prevent what Gamu is saying, and that is goods that are coming into the AFCFTA market that are not entitled to preferential treatment, who would be getting that preferential treatment. We will have to be robust in implementing and applying our rules of origin regime so that we don't create job losses. And we will have to make sure that we work very closely with customs authorities across the African continent to make sure that we build the capacity of our customs authorities and that we build the enforcement capacity of our customs authorities to fight this issue of transshipment of goods. We are not saying there should be no third country goods. We are simply saying that goods that should enjoy AFCFTA preferential treatment should be goods that are legitimately entitled to AFCFTA preferential treatment. We will still get goods coming in from other parts of the world, but they will not be enjoying the preferences that we have agreed to extend to one another in the AFCFTA. It all will depend on our robust application and implementation of our rules of origin regime. And for that, we will have to work with our customs authorities to ensure that we improve their capacity. We have already had 2 meetings with the customs authorities here in Accra, Ghana last year. All African customs authorities were here. So these are things that, that we are actively working on at the moment. Now, imports from the diaspora, it will depend on our rules of origin regime. Our rules of origin regime has a very, very stringent standard for products that enjoy preferences, that these products have to be either wholly obtained on the African continent, or there has to be substantive value addition on the African continent of a product that comes in from a third country. And so depending on the product and depending on the threshold for value addition, goods that are coming in from third countries may not enjoy the same preferences as goods that are manufactured on the African continent or where there's value addition on the African continent, because we want to foster industrial development here on the African continent. But I will say this, already we are seeing signals from global investors that they are looking at the African market positively because of our rules of origin regime that is going to be, that will place a high value addition requirement. For example, in the area of automobiles, the local content requirement in many African countries is relatively high. It is relatively high, and the reason is to foster industrial development in country, in region, on the continent of Africa. But some automobile manufacturers look at that as a positive thing, because they look at it as an opportunity to invest on the African continent. And so this question of rules of origin is very, very important and is directly linked to Africa's sustained industrial development over decades to come. The last question about how to partner with us to fulfill the objectives of the AFCFTA, we are always willing to work with similarly minded organizations or institutions or individuals because we recognize this is about advancing Africa's economic development objectives. And Africa's economic development objective is bigger than one individual, is bigger than one institution. It will require that we work together collectively, whether we are on the African continent or outside of the African continent. We will have to work together to make sure that we partner to build investment links, to build regional value chains for industrial development on the African continent, to do all of these things that will accelerate the industrial development of the African continent. And so our door is open to work with you, to partner with you for Africa's industrial development and economic development in general.
Thank you very much, Secretary General Wemkele Mene. Our next question is coming from Ambassador Brieka Bennett. She is the head of mission for the Diaspora Africa Forum, DAF, and her question is, how will you be including the African diaspora in this important initiative? And Oliver Shikoze. Okay. No, there is no question there. And then we go to our next person, who is from Cape Town. He just says he's happy to be here. And our next person is from Grace Asare. No, she wants to know if this webinar will be recorded, and if they will have a story after this for publication. And Mr. Gam or Mrs. Gamuchirai Mutrezo. We've already answered that question. Okay. Excellency, maybe you first answer that question from Ambassador Bennett, and we'll find more questions here.
And thank you again for the questions, and thank you, Ambassador Bennett, for your question. Of course, the African Union, and we all know this, recognizes the diaspora as a sixth region, and so we have to work together with the diaspora in advancing the African objectives of the African continent for integration. I must confess, I don't have the answers in that respect. All I can say is that we will work together with the diaspora to ensure that in our implementation of this agreement, there is a role for them. The diaspora has access to global capital markets. The diaspora has access to technology, to skills. We know, for example, we know that there are investment opportunities in Africa that the diaspora may want to consider. We know that there are private equity firms that are owned and run by people in the diaspora who have access, as I say, to capital markets, who can and have the capacity to invest on the African continent. So we would have to work together to identify these investment opportunities that are now enabled, by the AFCFTA. But as I say, I don't have all the answers. We working together will have to find all the answers. But certainly there is a role for the diaspora to contribute in the implementation of the AFCFTA. And I look forward to working with Ambassador Bennett and the diaspora in that regard. I think there was a question about recording. I'm not sure that was directed at me, but I know that the colleagues in studio, they will respond to that particular question.
Yeah, I think we are I can say for sure that it is being recorded, and that maybe your office or the Department of Trade and Industry in the African Union might come out with a press release at the end of this to give outcomes of this press conference. Excellency, we have a question from David Mikja. He says, please, We want to know how far are we prepared to lower the cost of payment in items or in terms of dynamic currency convention, DCC, for all countries, real-time aggregate demand data for ATO, and the tagging, tracking, and monitoring of goods and services for rules of origin. Also, what is the current plan for the Pan-African Payment Settlement System, PSS, to be integrated into all ratified countries' customs systems? Excellency, you can take that one first.
Thank you very much. So on the question of currency, we, of course, as I mentioned earlier, we have a limited mandate. Our mandate is trade implementation of the AFCFTA. However, I will say that in respect of the challenges around currency and currency convertibility as it relates to trade, as I mentioned earlier, we have already started taking steps to confront that challenge. We are introducing the payments and settlement platform, which will be pan-African. All state parties will have the opportunity, if they so desire, to switch onto the platform. And the way it will work is that Afreximbank will be the settlement or the what is technically referred to as the intermediary bank. They will do the payments and the settlement in order to reduce the cost of converting the currency from your local currency to the currency of at the receiving end. This is very important for ensuring that we reduce the cost of trade on the continent. We make it more affordable and more efficient. I expect that in the next 6 to 12 months, that the payments, the Pan-African Payments and Settlement Platform will be fully effective across the African continent. There were some delays that, of course, were occasioned by COVID-19. There is a pilot of 6 countries that is being rolled out at the moment. But we have to continue working hard to make sure that as many countries as possible are part of the Pan-African Payments and Settlement Platform. And in this regard, we have already started consulting with Afreximbank, with the African Association of Central Banks, so that we have a collectivity in ensuring the rollout of the Pan-African Payments and Settlement Platform. Regarding tracking rules of origin, the rules of origin implementation will happen at national level or regional level if you are a customs union. What we are in the process of designing are digital enabled tools that will make sure that from a customs point of view, everything is accessible on a digital platform. So certificate of origin with the necessary security, blockchain features and all of those required elements of it. Or what we want to do is that ultimately, as we trade under the AFCFTA, all our trade under the AFCFTA, there is a digital platform on which you can access a new market on the African continent, in terms of which you can verify a certificate of origin on this digitally enabled platform, so that in general, trade on the African continent in 15 years' time is more accessible, much cheaper, affordable, and most importantly, more efficient. I think we have seen the advantages through this COVID-19 phase. We've seen the advantages of digitally enabled platforms and technology. And there are parts of the African continent that, by the way, are already, in some countries, already we have evidence of farmers of flour who access global flour markets using digitally enabled platforms from the African continent. So you can see already there's potential for this to have a massive impact on boosting intra-Africa trade on the African continent. I think those, Madam Tanko, are all the questions that that I took note of. Perhaps we can take one final round, if that's fine.
Thank you, Excellency. Okay, our next question is coming from Peter Fabriciu. He says, an article in the Daily Maverick by trade analyst Donald McKay says that South Africa is only trading so far with Egypt and Sao Tome and Principe. And Egypt has since said that it is still negotiating terms with SACU, therefore also with South Africa, and Botswana has not ratified the AfCFTA. So this suggests SACU and therefore South Africa will not be able to trade with Egypt or anyone else. Please explain.
Well, customs unions and the question that Peter refers to, it talks about SACU, which is a customs union. Usually customs unions have to trade under the same terms at the same time under the common external tariff. And I don't know the details of what SACU and South Africa have agreed to. What I do know is that from a customs readiness point of view, Egypt, SACU, Egypt, South Africa, and Ghana are ready. It may very well be that within the customs union itself, the members of the customs union will have to come to an arrangement about what do you do when one of the members of that customs union is not ready. That is a matter that is entirely for internal arrangements of the Southern African Customs Union or any other customs union. And by the way, SACU is not the only one in this situation. There are countries in the East African community who have not yet ratified. There are countries in ECOWAS who have not yet ratified. And there are countries in SACU who have not yet ratified. What I must confront head on is the underlying suggestion from whoever wrote that article, and that is to say that we must not move forward as the African continent until everybody is at the same level of readiness. If we take that approach, we are not going to make any progress as the African continent. We've got to make progress. We've got to start moving forward with those countries that already have the infrastructure in place. And I will also emphasize that we've got 34 countries who have deposited their instruments of ratification. That means that these countries are legally committed to the start of trading. And for those countries who may not have the customs infrastructure in place yet, as I mentioned earlier, there are modalities for how they will give credit to traders. So what I contest very vigorously from whoever wrote that article, I contest the idea that because there are challenges of readiness here and there, we must therefore take a step back as the African continent and not move forward. You must remember, in about 4 or 5 decades ago, the European Union was not at this level of integration that we have today. When the European Union started as a small group of countries, there were similar challenges. there were similar challenges of readiness. Some countries joined later, some countries joined, yet were not ready, but they understood the political importance of integration of the market in Europe. And so similarly on the African continent, we must not hold Africa to a much higher standard from a trade perspective that nobody else has ever met before. There has never been a trade agreement where everybody trades on the same day at the same time. Why should it be different for the African continent? Why do you hold Africa to a different standard under international trade law? I think it's unfair. So the point I make is this: there are countries who are ready. We are moving forward with those countries who are trading under this regime. There are countries who have expressed commitment, and they will introduce the customs procedures as time moves forward. So I thank you very much, Madam Tanko, and I want to thank all the journalists and everybody who has joined us this afternoon. Thank you very much, and God bless the African continent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Excellency Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Area. Dear colleagues, with this, we have come to the end of our press virtual conference, and we have taken note of all the other questions that have been submitted. We will make sure we give answers to them and respond to you through your emails. And we want to wish you a happy end of day. Thank you very much, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you.